Studies, Docomomo Macau member. And Dr. Imon specializes in World Heritage and Heritage Tourism Management. His teaching and research experience spanned more than 24 years, which includes consultancy for UN bodies and governments in the 14 countries in heritage and tourism management projects. Currently, he's the academic coordinator of heritage management and tourism business management programs at the Macau Institute for Tourism Studies and visiting faculty at the University of Hong Kong. And he has published more than 40 articles in books, journals, and conference proceedings. His research works focus on community engagement in heritage management, heritage impact assessment, sustainable tourism in historical cities, and heritage interpretation. And his topic today is a new life of life support rationales for extending the life of a building. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so thank you for inviting me to this event. And it's also nice to see Sheridan after a long time. So my presentation kind of, I should have been before Sheridan's one, because Sheridan focuses on, how to take care of heritage building, especially modern heritage. But I talk more about the conceptual issues involved in making decisions about heritage buildings. I understand Docomomo is more about modern heritage, but it's heritage. So I will not make that distinction between old heritage and modern heritage. So the title is A New Life or Life Support. Because when it comes to taking care of heritage, we see the wide range of actions that we can take. Sometimes it's a completely new thing. I mean, we just keep a little bit of our heritage and then have a huge intervention where the old is completely lost, or maybe it's just a little bit there as a symbol. Or sometimes we just complete preservation in its original context or in the original shape and form. So this the range is quite wide. But the point is that at what point we decide to conserve something, and how we may come to that point. Often this comes with this idea that we need to do something about it because otherwise it will be lost, or something will be damaged, or value will be gone. So the questions that I'll try to address, but not very specifically and in a particular order, but overall, does the building really die? Because when you talk about extending life, we're talking about, maybe it implies that one point might die. So we want to extend it. In other words, we think that it has a life. And why do you want to extend the life of a building? This again a question because sometimes we assume, I'm from a heritage background, so I do care about not just building heritage, and I work in this field, so you can understand that I have feeling for our heritage, and which involves a large part of which are actually built heritage. But then again, this question is, do we need to extend the life of every building? Which buildings, right? So, and why? And it's also an important decision to make at what point we make that decision to do something about it. Often, as I said, something has, an imminent threat, is in some kind of danger, or something is about to be lost, and we become concerned, and then we take actions or try to take actions. But is this the right way to do it? And should we, just wait for that moment or wait for that situation when it becomes urgent? And what do we mean by that? What do we mean by extended life? Is it the same thing as, gets a longer life, or it has a new life, or it has become something different, very different from its original self? So it may sound philosophical questions, but yes, I mean, we need to think about these things. Otherwise, it's very hard to, give justifications to many other people who don't see built heritage in the same way that we do. And then, what option do we have when we want to prolong the life of building? So again, as I said, these are not questions that I'm going to answer one by one. But in general, I'll try to address these issues. So the life cycle of a building, if you look at this, it's quite simple. Before we really start to construct, of course, we design buildings, but of course not buildings are designed, but decisions are made earlier before we start the construction. And then we need materials, but before that, we need to extract raw materials from natural resources to turn them into construction materials. And then we construct. And then we have the use phase. And that's the phase that we are most familiar with. Architects may know the phase before that, but most people see the end product. Okay, this is what we use, which becomes part of our life. And depending on how we care, the length of life can vary. In general, as people say, a concrete building can last up to 100 years. Maybe brick buildings slightly longer. But we know the buildings built thousands of years ago, structures built thousands of years ago, are still there, still in a very good condition. So this kind of generalization is not applicable universally. And of course, that's point, the end of life. And how does it happen? And how a building comes to that point when we have to take the life support. So, and what happens after that? Most of the cases, and especially in Macau, it all goes to dumping ground. Maybe in some cases we recycle a little bit. And this takes us to the broader question of sustainable development. Is it the right way to deal with our places? And all of this, I mean, when we talk about extending the life of the building, and we talk about conservation, we essentially talk about sustainability, because by prolonging the life, we make sure that the material, the energy used to construct these things has a longer service life. So in a way, we reduce the impact on our environment in different ways. But seldom do we really recycle our materials, especially in Macau. So the question is, does a building die? Sometimes, we say that in a different way, say, okay, the economic life is no longer viable. I mean, it's gone, it's economically. And sometimes the functional life is also has come to an end because it no longer can serve its original function. Or it could be the social life. People are no longer, willing to live there, or maybe there's a demographic changes, people have left that area, they don't need it anymore. But you can see on the right-hand side, the picture is a grass silo in Pok Fulam, Hong Kong. It's a part of a dairy farm. So it had a life in the past. It has a use, but it doesn't have that use anymore. The building, the structure is not gone. It's still there. But can we infuse life into it? Can we revive it? And if we revive it, in what ways we can revive it? And do we get a soul back, or we give it a new life? It becomes, a body of somebody else, but the soul of something else. So again, the decisions are tough, difficult decisions, but often we don't try to answer these questions before we make actions, because us professionals, especially the conservation professionals, take it as granted that yes, we have to do something about it, it has a value, and then we should do something about it. And there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is very often we deal with properties where we have multiple stakeholder interests. So how do we convince others about these things? So, this becomes a bit complicated issue. So how does a building die? Here we can see a building has died here. You can see this kind of remain of that building, but we can see that it has given a way to something new. So maybe it's a road, a new building, something is missing here. But why did it happen? So one of the things that we need to understand the building's obsolescence. So something becomes obsolete, no longer needed, right? And we think, okay, what should you do about it? If we can't find a new use of it or proper use of it, contemporary use, then maybe we say, okay, it's time for it to go. But often this pressure, as Sheridan was also saying, that the pressure coming from outside. So pressure to build, pressure to have new things. So I'll focus a little bit on this issue of obsolescence, because by understanding how buildings become obsolete, we can also understand what we can do about extending the life and where we should make an intervention. So obsolescence is a results when there is a change in the requirements or expectations regarding the use of a particular object or idea. So there's a change, and the change is in the requirements or expectations from whatever is in question. There are many ways building can become obsolete. One very commonly understood one is the physical obsolescence. It has decayed to such an extent, for whatever reason, that it cannot be used anymore in that in a certain way. Sometimes you can repair, but again, sometimes it comes to a situation which is beyond repair, or repair becomes so expensive that it doesn't make sense to repair anymore. Economic obsolescence is the cost of continued use becomes so high compared to other alternatives. And this is probably the most commonly understood one, that, okay, you have a building and then the services are already decayed, or in a situation that it requires the constant repair, or if it's a concrete structure, maybe inside the reinforcement bars are rusting, and to repair it will cost a lot. So, I mean, if you just want to continue, I'm not talking about large-scale damage, but still you continue, and from economic point of view, it doesn't make any sense. But one thing that I just want to highlight is that all of these are not really separate. They're very much interlinked each other. So one influences the other. So for example, material or physical decay can happen because of economic reasons too, because you're not repairing anymore. So then the physical decay starts to become more pronounced. Functional decay, again, is a very commonly understood problem with many of our older buildings, because originally designed for a purpose, but over time that function is no longer needed, no longer viable. We need it, we're not practicing it anymore. So, and we don't or can't find any new use of this building. So it comes to this point when it becomes functionally obsolete. The other one is a technological one. In building, we have a lot of different kinds of services. And the technology used can become obsolete. They're no longer available anymore to replace them in the same way. And the building cannot accommodate those things. In this case, we call that it's a technologically obsolete. Social one is quite interesting. And the change is social attitude. Maybe we do not want to live in a certain way. We see better alternatives, better ways of living. So although the existing building is perfectly all right in this sense, just because of our attitude has changed towards that kind of living, we no longer want that kind of use or that kind of lifestyle. And sometimes, as I mentioned, demographic change, sometimes there's a reduction in population number. So you don't need so many housing blocks. So what happens to this leftover, unused housing blocks? What do we do about that? So we say, okay, they're obsolete, their function is no longer needed in the current circumstances. And this is non-legal and political. For example, many old buildings cannot meet the modern building codes. So what happens? So if there's a strict regulation about, say, disabled access, and the building cannot accommodate that, so how, what can you do about that? Sometimes the planning zones change. So maybe it was an industrial building before, and the industrial function is no longer allowed there. It only allows residential function. So what we do at that industrial building. But it doesn't mean that's the end of the life. It just means that the original function, the original use is no longer viable for various reasons. But then there are things that we can do about them. Market one is probably we are very familiar with in a situation in a fast, rapidly growing places like Macau, where development pressure is too high. And the alternative or economic return from a new building is much higher than the existing building. So the pressure to develop or redevelop place could be very high, and making a building, the original building, obsolete. So just want to illustrate this point. I'm not sure whether you have seen this, but it's quite popular in many places. I mean, you have documentaries have been made on this. This is although it's called Battleship Island, it's not exactly the name because of the shape of it, especially its profile. It looks like a battleship. So it's off the coast of in Japan's main islands, and used to be the center of deep sea coal mining. Set in the 19th century, it served until middle of 20th century. But then the coal reserve and extracting coal from that reserve became financially untenable. So they stopped that, closed the mine. So the people who live there, they left. So left with this one, we have the old buildings. So what to do with this one? It has been like this for a very long time. At one point, there's also a discussion about nominating for World Heritage and heritage designation, also for tourism, but then also found that even tourism was not viable because getting there, and they could only have a small number of people. There are a lot of safety issues because of lack of maintenance for a long time. And to upgrade those things, so to make it suitable for tourism would cost a lot of money. And then the tourism return, the expected tourism return from it was not justified. So the question is again, what to do with this one? So is it really, the death of this place? Not entirely. Those who are fond of James Bond movies, Skyfall, part of it was shot here. Tourists also come and started to return. And there is some discussion about really turning it into a tourism destination. So it might, have some life back. Of course, not its original life, a different life. So it's a reborn, rebirth of this place in a different way. This is very interesting because often we think, after we build and then for many years it, is used, and then after one point the original use becomes, no more viable, so it dies. And this is an interesting study, and a recent study that identified this is sometimes, even before it's constructed, can become obsolete. I was very tempted to use some Macau examples, but for some reason I didn't do it, because it can identify projects even before it was built, something. But this one is an airport in Jaisalmer, India, in the northwestern part of it. It is the World Heritage, part of it is a World Heritage site. But when they built, the government wanted to have this no-frill, low-budget airlines throughout India, so wanted to expand it. So the government billed millions of dollars. So in 2013, the work was done, completed, ready for operation, but no airlines wanted to fly there because it was not economically viable for them to fly there. So almost for 5 years, it was left like this. So it's a good example of why, I mean, when we are planning, and it's not just for new construction, even for our conservation work, we need to think about that. So the viability, often, museumization is kind of a solution for many conservation work because that's the easiest thing to do. And we don't think about their sustainability, not just social sustainability, also economic sustainability of this. Now we are in the COVID-19 situation, and the financial situation is getting difficult for many, almost all countries around the world. Now the museums are closed because you can't, not just because of safety reason, it's not also viable to run only for a few people. Just like, the airlines, because they have grounded their fleets, because running them is not really financially viable. Even they can fly them, but the cost of running them is much higher than just keeping them, stored somewhere. So those are from Macau. I mean, we were all from Macau. So you all know this building, but it's not so much about this building. It's more about the graph that I'm showing on the left. So if you use this graph, maybe should I point here? It's better. Yeah, right. So on this axis is the time. And then is the performance of the building, the vertical axis. And the commissioning time. So I'm not talking about the construction time after the construction is complete, before it comes into use. At the initial phase, it runs at the maximum or optimum performance level. But then at one point, its performance starts to decline. And when it happens, it will depend on many factors. And it's the decline at one point, it will reach a level, what's called the minimum acceptable performance, after or below which we say that it's not performing, its own functions are not in the right level. So if we draw a line here, we can say this is this design service life, right? When it was designed. But this is not a fixed one, because when it was designed, we anticipated this one. And then, if it's normally maintained, regularly used, at one point it will come to reach this point. So what happens here? So we can say that, okay, this building is no longer useful, all right? And we need to do something about it. But not always we take care of this kind of buildings in a proper way. If the maintenance is not proper, it's poor quality maintenance, not regular, the design life can become shorter. So, the building performance will decline faster than anticipated. So you'll end up having a shorter lifespan. So become obsolete earlier than than its designed life. So that means in many cases, we can actually address or prolong the life just by ensuring that we have proper maintenance. And the maintenance is not the structure of the building. We also need to think about the services. And sometimes we do upgrade things. So maintenance is not just keeping the original services intact, repairing constantly, because sometimes the repairing may become unsustainable. We may need to upgrade it. So it means that we're not talking about whole scale, overhaul of the building, but regular maintenance here and there, and making interventions just to ensure that this life continues in a proper way. So an example of this, and you can see the rebar inside is quite rusted. So maybe the building is quite okay. Maybe just a part of it is damaged. And then maybe we take intervention at the right time. So it's the timing of the intervention which is very important, because otherwise it becomes expensive, or the pressure for demolition can become too high because people will say, oh, the repairing it is too expensive. So when we take actions, it's important. Now, Sheridan talked about understanding the significance, right, as a kind of starting point for conservation. And she talked about having a conservation management plan, making it proactive rather than taking action when the repair is needed or becomes critical. So do we have an inventory of our resources, heritage resources? Do we have a condition assessment, all of this one? Do we have some kind of at least maintenance management system in place? It doesn't have to be whole-scale conservation, but these kind of small interventions can actually prolong the life without having big financial burden on the people or whoever is owner of those buildings. The other one is, as I mentioned, that we can prolong the life. So if we, time to time, make interventions to renew things. So again, we don't need a large-scale conservation all the time, just as a matter of understanding that we can. So just have to understand what kind of obsolescence are we talking about? Are we talking about physical obsolescence, economic obsolescence, or is it financial, economic, or social, right? So depending on the type of obsolescence we identify, we should make an action at certain points and as early as possible. All right, so you can see that we can gain time or we can lose time depending on our actions. So a building like this was built a long time ago, I think it's almost 100 years now, it's perfectly working, right? We're not making, we made some intervention at one point, but we don't have to make serious interventions all the time. It's being used, it's being serving its purpose very well, is serving not just its function as a market, but it's also serving a lot of these social functions or social not responsive services to the community. All right, this is from Hong Kong. It's a former police station. It lost its functional purpose some time ago. So they didn't need it, and the buildings were they had better move somewhere else. And it is located in the middle of the city, it's in central area. It's very highly expensive place. So what did they do with it? Did they demolish it and build something more profitable? No. What they look to do is the social contribution of this kind of thing. So because all the returns are not necessarily about financial returns, because the social contribution of our heritage, it can be very huge. Sheridan showed the example of the Sydney Opera House, and they're showing how much return, financial return is giving back to the people. Although it took much longer, it overshoot the budget by, I think, by 10 times. But it also serving as an icon of the city. It is a tourist attraction, it symbolizes something now. So the overall gain, we need to understand that as well. So when it comes to cost analysis, cost benefit analysis, often we just do a financial analysis. Seldom do we count the other benefits in the equation and also the other cost in the equation. So this is the financial, the social contributions of this can be very high. So by conserving this place, turning it not into just a museum, but also having contemporary use in the middle of this densely populated, densely built city in Hong Kong, the Sky Kwan has won a conservation award from UNESCO, because it's not just a good conservation practice in terms of material conservation, because it's contributed to other dimensions of sustainability. There's okay, slight mistake, but this one should be here anyway. So one thing that is not constant is this one, this performance, acceptable performance. In previous graphs, I showed this as a straight line, as a constant. But I mentioned about the social issues, the social aspect of it. Our expectations might change. And when expectation changes, what is considered an optimal performance may not be the same after some time. When we see, we live in a walk-up apartment building, right? So we're used to it, and we see there's another modern building with lifts in it. So what do we do about that? So people now think that this building is not really desirable, just because there are other buildings, other alternatives that can serve better their needs. So this performance level, which was a benchmark in the past, okay, has changed. So what happens here when this line goes upward, we see there is a reduction in the life, the useful life of that, or more from a social point of view. So this is again something we need to understand, but it's not that there's no there's no beneficial end to it. As long as we don't just look at it from an economic point of view. So examples of how we can actually give new life to this kind of old buildings. This one, this is University of Chicago, Chicago Booth campus in Hong Kong. It has two different elements from two different periods. On the left-hand side and then below that, they have some military facilities from the Second World War period. And this is that was used by the police to interrogate refugees and political, because this is from the British period. So these are grade 3 buildings. Grade 3, and if you are familiar with the Hong Kong system, they have declared monuments as the legal protection, but then there are these categories of heritage buildings which do not enjoy heritage legal protection, but it gives a clear indication of the importance. Like grade 1 is the better heritage quality, and then grade 3 is very low level. So grade 3 buildings, but instead of demolishing them, because they found that there is a social value of these buildings. Architectural, maybe not so much, but the social value is there because many of the people during the British period, I mean, those who come back and they were actually interrogated, they're imprisoned in this place. They have this connection, and it's just a part of Hong Kong's history. So this was, I mean, the magazine, the canons and all these things, that part is conserved as it is. But this one has been used, adaptively reused as a museum for those histories of the colonial period. And then it's made part of this new campus facility, which is a very modern building. Now here you see that the focus is not just entirely this one, but considering its social value has been kept, it is given a new use, new purpose. Yet, and it's financially, it didn't put any burden on the government because everything was paid for by this new development. So it's a way, we call partnership. And one of the main pillars of the areas of such a development is the partnership, because we cannot achieve sustainable development by working alone. And this is a very important part of it. Now the issue is that when it comes to heritage, we have this kind of tug of war between us and them. And I don't want to define who's us and who's them, but normally it's a tug of war. Someone wants to keep it, someone wants to get rid of it, do something else with it. But it's not so straightforward. In the middle, I mean, I used a cartoon, but just replace it with heritage, and then you should see that there are multiple stakeholder interests. Many people want to deal with it in many different ways, and everybody is fighting for it. I know Docomomo is doing a wonderful job because this modern heritage is not well understood. Because in many places, even the law sometimes in many places say that it has to be at least 100-year-old before we can consider it as heritage. So what happens if anything is less than that, we can't consider it as heritage just because the law does not allow it. But we know Sydney Opera House is built not so long ago, right? And it's on the World Heritage List. So by making people understand the value of these places and making it presenting in a systematic way, we create a balance in this process, because otherwise people will, the only thing is like obsolete buildings, right? And then for them, they will not understand why this group of people are so eager to protect it. We have a case in Hong Kong, in Macau, about the Blue House. The government wanted to demolish it. I think it's in 2006 or 7 in Tap Siak area. What happened? People protested, and the government invited an expert. Came and said it has huge social value, and the building is still there. So what happened there is that the heritage value was made available to the people who don't see it in the same way. And once they understood it, then they become, start to pay attention first of all, and some may start to start to care about them, and then we can help change. So when we have this multi-party involvement, and Sheridan also mentioned about stakeholder involvement, this is something important. So I think the seminar like this is important to make this, bridge this gap of understanding between experts and non-experts. And of course, experts from other disciplines who don't really see valid heritage in the same way. But sometimes we have examples like this, and I think it's something we need to also understand that, we talked about starting from understanding the heritage value, and this is all from Macau, and we need to understand how much we have done it. But this is, again, it's not a good example of bad conservation, but I want to highlight that there are levels of importance, right? In some cases, you need to protect everything. In some cases, you may forego, and which, again, Sheridan presented in her, the table, that the level of acceptable change, right, can vary between buildings, even within a building, between different components. And these things have to be made clear to others as well. Are we okay with the time? Right. So I just want to talk about different conservation approaches, because this really affects the way we take care of our buildings. This is a study part by is quite renowned in the conservation field by Yuka Ippolito. So in general, he identified 4 different approaches to architectural conservation. The traditional approach is really, it's not based on understanding heritage value, but just because people want to prolong their life. This is what we do every time. We fix our broken tap in our apartment, or change the light bulb, or if it's water leakage, we fix it. We do it all the time, right? And that's also conservation, because we are ensuring the building continues to serve its purpose. But then, in the mid-19th century, this became very strong. One is coming from the French side. Viollet-le-Duc was considered one of those most famous proponents of this one, talking about the correctness, design, the stylistics, aesthetics of heritage. So if needed to complete whatever reconstruction is needed to complete something, is okay according to that approach. The other one is building as a document approach, where we're asking Maurice that we should not touch it. We should keep it as it is, right? Because the material itself has the value. So we should not use any new material. If we do that, this is a kind of a sin, right? We should avoid. But then in more recent times, we understand that we cannot just decide from this kind of rigid point of view, because we need to decide based on the merit of the building, the value of those buildings. And we already know there are different levels of values. And so the starting point is understanding the significance of it. And based on that, we decide what kind of actions we should take. But unfortunately, all of these are actually still evident. It's not like something has happened in the past. We still see this kind of the romantic historic approach. In some case, again, you may find people who are very much in the building as a document approach is still evident. But what is being highlighted and what we're talking about is this, what we call values-based approach. So the approach is dependent on our understanding of the value. So in conclusion, So this is a complete complex issue, the obsolescence. It's an interaction between multiple factors. So it's not just one thing that affects the other. It's just quite complicated. Now, even when we are designing it at the beginning, we can consider the issue of obsolescence. But when you're even making intervention, you conserve something, we should not forget about the obsolescence, that one point in time, it will become obsolete again, and then probably we have to do something about it again. But then if we keep this in mind, that the types of obsolescence that we have seen, and then keeping that in mind that not all actions should be taken when it becomes life-threatening, we then know that in a much simpler way, we can prolong the life of building. And of course, we can't foresee all changes when we're making decisions today. But we have to understand that change is a constant. I know we can't really ignore that. And just because we can't foresee or predict all changes, doesn't mean that we can ignore that change. So we have to try to incorporate that as much as possible in our decision making. So, and again, I know all of this has to be within this framework of sustainable development, which is not just economic sustainability. We also need to consider the environmental and social sustainability. So I hope it's not too theoretical, and I really, when I was invited to this presentation, I was thinking whether I should present a case study, of good conservation. But I thought, the more time I gave to this, I started to realize that there are all these critical issues, unresolved questions there that we sometimes just overlook because we tend to understand them very well already. But the problem is, there are many others we don't really understand. And when you talk about partnership, when we talk about stakeholder, collaboration, involvement, we need to make sure that these are explicitly stated, understood, and communicated with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody.